Welcome to Uncovered Images. Today we're going to explore a collection of photographs that have remained hidden from public view for over a century. These images tell a harrowing tale of survival in the harsh and unforgiving landscape of the American frontier. Join us as we unravel the story behind these forgotten Wild West survival photos, a tale of courage, ingenuity, and the indomitable human spirit against overwhelming odds. The year was 1879. The American West was still a dangerous and largely untamed territory. The Transcontinental Railroad had been completed just a decade earlier, bringing more settlers than ever before, but vast stretches of wilderness remained unexplored by all but the most adventurous souls. The frontier was a place of stark contrasts, breathtaking natural beauty alongside brutal hardship, limitless opportunity shadowed by constant danger. Settlers were pushing further into these territories, seeking fortune, land, and a new beginning, carrying their dreams in creaking wagons across unforgiving terrain. Among these pioneers was a man named Thomas Blackwood, a photographer from Boston who had traveled west to document the expanding frontier and the last days of the truly Wild West. Unlike many of his contemporaries who were content to photograph the more civilized outposts, Blackwood was drawn to the raw edges of the frontier, where civilization and wilderness still clashed daily. He was known to venture where few photographers dared, seeking to capture images of a vanishing way of life before it disappeared forever into the relentless march of progress. Blackwood was known in certain circles for his meticulous documentation and his specially modified camera that could withstand the harsh conditions of frontier travel. His equipment was cutting edge for its time, a custom-built view camera with reinforced brass fittings that could endure the jolting of wagon travel and the extremes of frontier weather. What made his work particularly valuable was his use of an early dry plate technique that allowed him to develop images even in remote locations. While most photographers of the era were limited to studios or brief excursions, requiring cumbersome portable darkrooms and fragile wet plates, Blackwood could venture further into uncharted territory, preserving moments that would otherwise have been lost to time. His reputation had grown among collectors and newspaper editors back east who paid handsomely for his authentic glimpses into frontier life. Blackwood's photographs weren't the sanitized, posed shots common in the era. They captured the genuine article, the unvarnished reality of life on the edge of civilization. His portfolio already included rare images of remote mining camps, the construction of frontier outposts, and even a few remarkable portraits of native tribes who normally avoided contact with settlers. But Blackwood was always searching for the next untold story, the next opportunity to document history as it unfolded before his lens. In the spring of 1879, Blackwood joined a wagon train heading from Fort Laramie toward the Montana Territory. The group consisted of 23 people, families seeking land, a few prospectors chasing rumors of gold, and a small contingent of armed men hired to protect the travelers. The journey was expected to take about 6 weeks, following established trails for most of the route. 3 weeks into their journey, the wagon train encountered a band of travelers heading in the opposite direction. They shared disquieting news. Unusual activity had been reported ahead, with several homesteads found abandoned. The leader of the wagon train, a seasoned frontiersman named Jeremiah Wilson, called for a vote on whether to continue or alter their course. Despite the warnings, the majority voted to press on, believing the rumors to be exaggerated. This is where Blackwood's photographs begin to tell their story. The first images show the wagon train in high spirits despite the warnings. Men checking their Winchester rifles, women preparing meals over open fires, children playing between the wagons. The ordinary scenes of frontier travel, captured with remarkable clarity considering the technological limitations of the time. As the wagon train continued north, the photographs begin to change in tone. The smiling faces disappear, replaced by wary glances and tense postures. Blackwood captured images of the group forming their wagons into defensive circles at night, men taking turns standing watch with rifles at the ready. One particularly striking photograph shows a young boy, no more than 12 years old, practicing with his father's revolver by the light of a campfire, his expression unnervingly serious for one so young. Another shows a woman teaching her daughters how to load a shotgun, their faces a mixture of fear and determination. The frontier demanded that everyone, man, woman, and child, be prepared to defend themselves. Something had changed in the atmosphere of the group. though the photographs themselves offer no explicit explanation for the rising tension. 10 days later, disaster struck. The wagon train was crossing a narrow pass when they were ambushed, not by native warriors as they might have feared, but by a notorious gang of outlaws who had been terrorizing the territory for months. The Keller brothers' gang had a fearsome reputation for showing no mercy to those who crossed their path. The ambush was devastating. In the chaos that followed, the wagon train was scattered. Some wagons attempted to flee, others formed a hasty defensive position. Blackwood's camera captured fragments of the attack, distant figures taking cover behind rocks, muzzle flashes from rifles, the panic evident even in these still images. One photograph taken at great personal risk shows a wagon overturned and ablaze, a grim harbinger of the destruction that would follow. Another shows a mother pulling her children beneath a wagon for shelter, her face a mask of terror as bullets splintered the wood around them. Perhaps most haunting is an image of a man standing defiantly, firing his Winchester repeatedly despite a bloody wound visible on his shoulder, his last stand immortalized on Blackwood's photographic plate before he fell. The most chilling image from the ambush, however, shows one of the Keller brothers himself, a tall man with a distinctive scarred face, standing atop a rock outcropping, directing his men with calculated precision. This rare photograph of the notorious outlaw would later become crucial evidence, though at the time Blackwood could not have known the significance of what he had captured. When the dust settled, nearly half of the wagon train lay dead. Among the survivors were Blackwood, Wilson, 2 families with young children, and a handful of others. Most of their supplies had been taken by the Keller gang, along with their best horses and weapons. They were stranded in hostile territory with limited resources. What followed was a desperate bid for survival that Blackwood documented through his camera lens. The images show the survivors burying their dead, salvaging what supplies remained, and attempting to repair a single wagon that would carry the children and their most essential provisions. Wilson, who had spent years as a trapper before leading wagon trains, made a difficult decision. The nearest settlement was over 100 miles away through difficult terrain. With their supplies depleted and several injured among them, returning the way they had come offered the best chance of survival. But the Keller gang would likely be watching the main trails. They would need to forge a new path through unexplored territory. Blackwood's photographs chronicle this harrowing journey, the single wagon being pulled by the 2 remaining oxen, the adults walking alongside, some limping from injuries sustained during the ambush, the makeshift stretcher carrying an elderly man who had taken a bullet to the shoulder. The group's first major challenge came 3 days into their retreat, when they encountered a raging river swollen from spring snowmelt. The photographs show their ingenious solution, dismantling the wagon and using the parts to construct a rudimentary raft. One particularly striking image shows Wilson and 2 others testing the raft's buoyancy, their faces etched with determination and fear. It took them 2 days to ferry everyone across the river. By this time, their food supplies were dangerously low. Wilson led hunting parties each day, but game was scarce, and they dared not use their remaining ammunition too freely. The photographs from this period show increasingly gaunt faces. One particularly haunting image shows a young mother offering her own portion to her children, her eyes sunken but resolute. 2 weeks into their journey, another disaster struck. A sudden storm brought not just rain but hail and driving winds that destroyed their makeshift shelter and soaked what remained of their supplies. Blackwood's camera captured the aftermath. Drenched survivors huddled together for warmth, attempting to dry their few remaining possessions over a struggling fire. It was after this storm that young Sarah Mitchell, just 7 years old, developed a fever. The photographs show her mother Emma applying wet cloths to her forehead, the worry evident on every face around them. They had no medicine, and the nearest doctor was still at least 10 days away by their estimation. For 3 days, Sarah's condition worsened. The group slowed their pace, unwilling to leave the Mitchells behind. Blackwood's photographs from this period are few. Perhaps he too was focused on helping the child survive. But one image stands out, Wilson kneeling before Sarah, showing her a small wooden carving of a bird he had made to lift her spirits. The child's weak smile is just visible despite her obvious illness. The carving had taken hours of precious rest time, whittled by firelight with Wilson's hunting knife, but the frontiersman insisted the group's morale depended on the child's survival. Emma Mitchell's diary, discovered alongside the photographs, reveals the desperation of those days. Sarah burns with fever through the night. She wrote, "We have used the last of the willow bark tea and still the fever will not break. Mr. Wilson says we must continue moving, that to stay in one place invites disaster. But I fear the jolting of travel will only worsen her condition. I have never felt so helpless. I have 5 other children who need me, yet I cannot leave Sarah's side. Tonight, Mrs. Abernathy offered to take my watch so I might rest, but sleep eludes me. I find myself bargaining with God, offering anything if only my daughter might be spared. The photographs show the toll this vigil took on the entire group. Faces grew more haggard, not just from hunger, but from shared worry. One image shows 2 men constructing a more comfortable stretcher for the child, using precious cloth torn from their own blankets to provide cushioning. Another shows the other children gathering wildflowers to place beside Sarah's makeshift bed, a touching gesture of hope amid their dire circumstances. On the 4th day of Sarah's fever, the group stumbled upon an unexpected salvation, a hidden valley where a reclusive trapper named Holt had made his home. The photographs show a crude but sturdy cabin nestled against a rocky outcropping, smoke rising from its chimney. The valley itself was a natural fortress, accessible only through a narrow pass that could be easily defended, with a clear spring providing fresh water and abundant game evident from the stretching racks beside the cabin. It was an oasis of relative safety in the wilderness, the kind of place most travelers would pass by without noticing. Blackwood captured the group's approach to the cabin, their expressions a mixture of hope and wariness. In the frontier, strangers could represent either salvation or danger, and they had already learned the cost of misplaced trust. Wilson approached alone first, rifle held non-threateningly but ready, while the others waited with the wagons, the men positioned to defend the group if necessary. Holt was initially suspicious of the bedraggled group, his bearded face stern and unwelcoming in Blackwood's photographs. The image shows him standing in his doorway, a shotgun held across his chest, evaluating the strangers who had disturbed his solitude. But upon seeing the sick child, a remarkable transformation came over him. Blackwood's camera captured the moment, Holt's expression changing from suspicion to concern as he looked at Sarah's fevered face. Without another word, he set aside his weapon and motioned for them to bring the child inside. Holt, we learn from Blackwood's journal entries that accompanied some of the photographs, had once been a doctor in Chicago before some unspecified tragedy drove him to seek solitude in the wilderness. He had a small supply of medicines, including quinine, which he administered to young Sarah. The group stayed with Holt for nearly a week, regaining their strength and allowing Sarah to recover. The photographs from this period show a marked change, faces beginning to fill out again as they enjoyed Holt's hospitality and shared in his well-stocked larder. One image shows Holt teaching some of the men how to set traps for small game, knowledge that would serve them well for the remainder of their journey. Before they left, Blackwood convinced Holt to sit for a portrait, the only known image of this wilderness doctor. He stands tall beside his cabin, a rifle in one hand and a medical bag in the other, his beard wild but his eyes kind. Equipped with new knowledge, replenished supplies, and renewed spirits, the group continued their journey. But their hardships were far from over. The terrain became increasingly difficult as they navigated through mountains, trying to avoid the main trails where the Keller gang might be lurking. Blackwood's photographs capture the grueling nature of their travel, scaling steep slopes, helping each other across treacherous ravines, carrying children through dense forests. In one particularly striking image, Wilson stands atop a ridge, surveying the vast landscape ahead, his posture suggesting both weariness and determination. The photographs show fresh tracks discovered near their camp. The unmistakable imprint of the distinctive horseshoes used by the Keller gang had been found in the soft earth near their perimeter. One particularly tense image shows Wilson and 2 other men examining the tracks by lantern light, their expressions grim as they confirmed their worst fears. Another photograph taken from the high ground where Blackwood had been keeping watch shows distant pinpricks of light, campfires in the valley below, too numerous to belong to simple travelers. The Keller gang had found their trail and were closing in. With their limited ammunition and weakened condition, a confrontation would be disastrous. That night, Blackwood documented what might have been their final counsel. Gathered around a small, carefully shielded fire to avoid detection, the survivors debated their options in hushed tones. Some advocated attempting to outrun their pursuers. Others suggested hiding in the dense forest and waiting for the gang to pass. The photographs show the intensity of the discussion, faces illuminated by the flickering firelight, the weight of their predicament evident in every expression. Emma Mitchell is shown clutching Sarah to her chest, the now recovered child sensing the tension but not understanding its source. The other children huddled together nearby, wide-eyed and silent, having learned the hard way that survival on the frontier often depended on remaining unnoticed. Wilson devised a daring plan. The photographs show the group splitting up. The women and children would continue toward the settlement with half of the men, following a less direct but hopefully safer route through a series of narrow canyons that Wilson had mapped during his trapping days. Meanwhile, Wilson, Blackwood, and 3 others would create a false trail to lead the Keller gang away from the main group. Blackwood captured the emotional farewells. Husbands embracing wives not knowing if they would ever meet again. Fathers kneeling to give final instructions to sons too young to join the diversion, but old enough to protect their mothers and sisters if the worst happened. One particularly poignant photograph shows young Sarah pressing Holt's wooden bird into Wilson's weathered hand, insisting he take it for luck. The frontiersman's usually stoic expression softens visibly as he accepts the gift, tucking it carefully into his shirt pocket close to his heart. Another image shows Blackwood himself preparing for the dangerous mission, checking his camera equipment alongside his rifle, determined to document whatever might come, perhaps knowing these images might be his last. As dawn broke, the 2 groups set off in different directions. Blackwood's final photograph of the main party shows them disappearing into the morning mist, the women looking back one last time at the men who were risking everything to ensure their safety. Then Wilson led his small band directly toward the Keller gang's last known position, deliberately leaving clear signs of their passage: broken branches, distinctive boot prints, even a dropped kerchief that had belonged to Emma Mitchell, calculated to convince the pursuers they were following the entire group. What followed was a dangerous game of cat and mouse. Blackwood's camera captured glimpses of their pursuers in the distance, riders silhouetted against the horizon, campfires visible at night from their hiding places. For 3 days, Wilson's small group led the Keller gang on a circuitous route away from their companions, staying just far enough ahead to avoid capture. On the 4th day, they made their stand. Finding a defensible position among a cluster of large boulders, they prepared an ambush of their own. The photographs show the men checking their weapons, their faces grim but resolved. They had perhaps a dozen bullets between them against a gang of at least 8 well-armed outlaws. The ensuing confrontation is documented in a series of remarkable photographs taken at great personal risk by Blackwood. From his position behind the rocks, he captured the Keller gang approaching the trap, the initial exchange of gunfire, and the chaos that followed. One image shows the moment the outlaws realized they had ridden into an ambush. Horses rearing in panic, men diving for cover, dust filling the air as bullets struck the ground around them. Another shows Wilson himself, rifle braced against a boulder, taking careful aim with the calm precision that had kept the group alive through weeks of hardship. The battle, if it could be called that, was brief but intense. Blackwood's photographs chronicle a desperate gambit by men who had nothing to lose, fighting not for wealth or glory, but simply for the chance to see their loved ones again. One particularly dramatic image shows one of Wilson's companions, a man named Jenkins who had lost his wife in the initial ambush, standing briefly exposed to fire at 2 approaching outlaws simultaneously. Determination and grief mingled on his face as he pulled both triggers. Through skill, desperation, and no small amount of luck, Wilson's group managed to wound several of the gang members without taking casualties themselves. One photograph shows an outlaw clutching a bloodied arm as he retreats. Another captures a riderless horse bolting from the battlefield, its owner presumably fallen. The Keller brothers themselves are visible in one distant shot, the elder gesticulating angrily as the younger appears to argue for retreat. The outlaws, not expecting such fierce resistance from what they thought was a group of weakened travelers, eventually withdrew to reassess their approach, leaving behind 1 dead and carrying away at least 2 wounded comrades. This gave Wilson and his companions the opportunity they needed. Under cover of darkness, they slipped away, taking a treacherous mountain path that the gang's horses couldn't follow. The photographs show them scaling near vertical slopes using improvised rope harnesses, helping each other up sheer rock faces in the dim pre-dawn light. One particularly harrowing image shows Jenkins hanging precariously from a rope after a handhold crumbled beneath his weight, Wilson and another man straining to pull him to safety while balanced on a narrow ledge with a dizzying drop below them. Another shows the men navigating a knife-edge ridge as storm clouds gathered ominously on the horizon, adding urgency to their already desperate situation. Blackwood's diary, found with the photographs, describes this journey in stark terms. We move like hunted animals, snatching moments of rest when we dare, always listening for pursuit. Keller is known for his tenacity. He has tracked men across hundreds of miles before. Our only advantage is the terrain. Wilson knows these mountains in ways that maps cannot convey, finding paths where none seem to exist. Last night we slept in shifts, huddled in a shallow cave as rain lashed the mountainside. Jenkins's wound has opened again. The fall tore his stitches, but he refuses to slow our pace. We have perhaps 6 bullets remaining between us. If Keller finds us before we reach the settlement, we will make them count. The weather, which had been their enemy so often during their journey, finally turned in their favor. A heavy snowfall in the high passes covered their tracks and made pursuit on horseback impossible. But it also increased the danger of their own journey, forcing them to navigate treacherous slopes made slick with ice and snow. One photograph shows the men wading through snow up to their knees, faces raw from the cold, breath visible in the frigid air. Another captures them crossing a half-frozen stream, the water numbing their already battered bodies. For 2 days they pushed themselves to the limits of human endurance, stopping only when absolutely necessary for brief rest. Blackwood's images from this period are few and often blurred, taken hurriedly during these short breaks, his own exhaustion evident in the quality of the photographs. Finally, they descended from the mountains and found themselves on the outskirts of the settlement. The photographs show their first glimpse of civilization after their ordeal, distant buildings shimmering in the haze of a summer afternoon. More importantly, they found their companions already there, having arrived 2 days earlier. The reunion is captured in a series of emotional photographs, embraces between friends who feared each other dead, tears of relief, children running to greet the returning men. The settlement had already heard fragments of their story from the first arrivals and had organized a posse to search for the missing men, but now they returned on their own. Blackwood's final photographs of this saga show the survivors being welcomed into the settlement. Exhausted but alive, they had beaten overwhelming odds. Young Sarah, now fully recovered, is shown presenting Holt's wooden bird to Wilson in gratitude for his leadership that had brought them all to safety. The story of the wagon train ambush and the subsequent survival journey might have remained just another unrecorded tragedy of the frontier, if not for Blackwood's photographs. Yet strangely, these images never appeared in any publications of the era. The newspapers that had eagerly published Blackwood's previous work received none of these extraordinary photographs. Blackwood himself seems to have withdrawn from public life shortly after reaching safety, declining lucrative offers from publishers interested in his frontier experiences. Within a year, he had sold his Boston studio and disappeared from the photographic community altogether, leaving colleagues and collectors baffled by his sudden departure from a promising career. The reason for this mysterious withdrawal became clear only recently, when a collection of letters was discovered alongside the photographs in the Mitchell family's possession. These yellowed pages, written in Blackwood's increasingly agitated hand, reveal a disturbing epilogue to their harrowing journey. In his correspondence, Blackwood recounts how, upon reaching the settlement and sharing their story with the local marshal, they learned a chilling truth. The Keller brothers were not just outlaws, but were connected to powerful figures in the territorial government. The gang's operations, rustling, robbery, and worse, were tacitly protected by officials who received a share of their ill-gotten gains. "I had thought our ordeal ended when we reached civilization," Blackwood wrote in one particularly revealing letter, "but I now understand it has only changed form. The marshal himself warned me, not officially but as a man concerned for our safety, that certain powerful men would prefer our story remain untold." The photograph of Jacob Keller directing the ambush would be particularly problematic, he suggested, as it connects him directly to an attack that left 11 settlers dead. Settlers whose deaths have been officially attributed to Indian hostilities to justify increased military presence in native territories. Faced with threats against both himself and the survivors he had come to view as family, Blackwood made the difficult decision to hide his photographs and the story they told. He entrusted the collection to Emma Mitchell, Sarah's mother, extracting a promise that they would remain hidden until all those involved had passed away. The Mitchell family kept that promise for generations. The photographs remained hidden in a false-bottomed trunk, passed down through the family along with the story of their origin. It wasn't until 2018, when the last known descendant of the territorial officials implicated in the cover-up had died, that Sarah Mitchell's great-great-granddaughter felt the time had come to bring these images to light. The photographs now reside in a small museum in Montana, where they provide a remarkable window into one of the countless untold stories of survival from America's frontier era. They remind us that behind the romanticized myths of the Wild West were real people facing extraordinary challenges with courage, ingenuity, and a fierce will to survive. These forgotten Wild West survival photos were hidden from us for nearly 140 years. They tell a story not of legendary gunfighters or famous battles, but of ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances, perhaps the truest embodiment of the frontier spirit that shaped a nation. As we look at these faces from the past, Thomas Blackwood, Jeremiah Wilson, Emma and Sarah Mitchell, the reclusive Dr. Holt, and all the others who made this remarkable journey, we're reminded that history is not just about the famous names that fill our textbooks. It's about countless individuals whose stories went unrecorded or, as in this case, were deliberately hidden. In bringing these images to light, we honor not just those who survived this particular ordeal, but all those whose struggles and triumphs on the American frontier have faded from memory. Their experiences, captured through Blackwood's lens and preserved through generations of careful guardianship, offer us a glimpse into a world both utterly foreign and intimately familiar, where the human spirit faced the wilderness and, against all odds, endured. Thank you for joining us on Uncovered Images as we explore these remarkable photographs and the story behind them. If you enjoyed this journey into the past, please consider subscribing to our channel for more hidden histories brought to light. Until next time, keep looking beneath the surface. You never know what forgotten stories are waiting to be discovered.